Hi friends, this is Marcos Colon. I am a professional educator, and today I have a special guest for an interview about creativity. My special guest is Ignacio Peña. He is a singer-songwriter, um, media creator from Puerto Rico, and he has a. I know him um, since I think personally. I think I know him since like 2012 around or 2011 around that time. But the first time I knew him was when I went to a rock concert, and he was one of the bands playing. That was back in 2003 or 2004, and it had a great impact on me that time. And then later, years later, I found him in Facebook, and I started having conversations with him about his work, and he was really open to let me in and understand what his art mean and all that. So today I have this creativity assignment that I have to do, and I thought of him as the person to interview about creativity. So Ignacio, tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience, and what do you do and what are you up to lately?
Sure. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank Marcos for thinking about me for this. I'm always honored when somebody wants to know about the way you create and think. So that's pretty nice. That's pretty cool. I began writing songs when I was 14. I would say that was the beginning of my more organized creative life. Um, I took songwriting very seriously at that age. Every weekend, I dedicated it to understanding the craft of songwriting. I was particularly into rock and roll, and being a kid from a tropical island into rock and roll, meaning being at the clash of those two worlds, the Anglo world and the Spanish world. Uh, Plus my local roots, Caribbean roots, and all that stuff, created a set of challenges because I was interested in being a purist about rock and roll. I was not interested in mixing it with other stuff, with my local stuff. So I think that required that I break it down musically, rock and roll, and understand it in a very organic, molecular way, I call it. And through that process of getting into songwriting, I arrived. I kind of started developing a theory of communication, a theory of all in communication, and I started arriving at the formula, at what I think is a formula of the center of all communications, which is the story. Uh, and this is something that we're uh, just recently understanding our condition as storytellers is something that has been really explored in the 20th century, um, and it's something that we're still learning a lot about. We hear a lot, we see and we hear a lot now about storytelling and how to use it for marketing, and how to use it for a bunch of different things. But I propose that it's a much deeper thing. That storytelling is so important because it's a reflection of the motions of nature as they apply to information. And the rules of storytelling, they come from the same place where the rules of motion come from. And storytelling is just the best encapsulation that we have to reflect those motions of nature. So when we're saying that something is storytelling, good storytelling, we're in a sense saying this reflects the motions of nature. Therefore, it moves us, it emotionalizes us effectively. And I think that is what's universal. That is what is common, and that is why we're able to communicate. Lo que es común is our perception of the motions of nature and of time space, which is the grid, the main grid that we ride on. And since time space is the same for everybody generally, so a mile is a mile for everybody, young, old, black, white, whatever, and an hour is an hour for everybody. Um, this is what we have in common, and this is how we communicate, and this is what the grid where we're able to to be creative at. So I understood that through my exploration of rock and roll and songwriting, and um, as I developed that theory, I was able to put it to test as I started changing mediums. Then I moved into video, and I was able to move into video effectively because I had seen where editing was equal to songwriting through the storytelling principles, and I was able to start editing and tell stories effectively in video. And then I did it in graphics, and then I did it in every project that I have to put that theory to test, and it's up until now it's generally helped me communicate effectively, even in mediums that I have little or no formal education in. So that's basically my spiel. I worry. I since I was a kid, I worry about the problems of perception, of human perception. I think at the center of everything that makes us uh, succeed or not succeed is our interpretation of the facts, which is the story that is being told to us about a particular thing. And the story is so powerful, it's so effective that it's a double-edged sword. If used honestly, it can be used to portray the most important truths and learnings and teachings. But also, it's so effective that it also makes the truth, or it can make false information look truthful. And this is where we have to study it and understand ourselves as homo narrans. Just recently, we started to call ourselves sociologically homo narrans, animals that tell stories, um, because we're recently understanding this part of our perceptive apparatus. We were in communications. We were under the rational paradigm, Aristotle's rational paradigm, up until 85. In 1985, Walter Fisher presented what we are getting into now, which is the narrative paradigm. The realization that humans do not make rational decisions, they make decisions based on how they understand the story of things. And this is something very recent, and I think we're just scratching the surface about this. But I hope that kind of
So
summarizes it effectively.
yeah, so to give our audience a little bit more background about you, Ignacio is as he said, a singer songwriter, um, in rock and roll, in rock, and he has like four productions.
Yes, four.
Yeah, four productions, and the first one was in 2000. El Mundo al Revés was in Spanish. Upside Down World would be in English. And then after that, he had Anormal, and which was a mix of Spanish and English songs, right?
Yes.
And then the el gran debate del planeta Tierra, which was like an educational project, helping schools and groups of kids understand things about the environment and science and technology, and it was super interesting, that project. But then in what, 2006, around
That was in
2010.
2010. Yes.
2010. Yeah, yeah. And then more recently, you've been releasing again your work for the songs of the fall of an empire, right?
Yes.
This one is totally in English, right?
This one is totally in English. Yes.
Totally in English. And also, Ignacio is a media creator using video, as he was saying, and he has 2 Emmy awards with some short. How do they call it? Short documentary or short
Yeah. Short documentaries. Yes.
short documentary. So, and the first time I saw Ignacio playing, which I didn't know his work before, that was like in 2003 or 2004. It was really stunning, and it stuck with me for all those years. After I found him in Facebook and I started asking him questions about it, because it was a rock concert, and I am a musician, and I was appreciating that, but he was also telling the story with a background with video clips that represented the song. So it was really interesting. And then after that, I saw he produced one of his own videos, and it was in local TV back in Puerto Rico when I was living in San Juan. So I would watch that video, and then so I have a friendship with Ignacio, and over the years we have spoken about different things. We have spoken about what he's telling us about narrative and storytelling. We have spoken about economics. We have spoken about religion, and all that. But the basis is for him is narrative. And so I wanted to ask you, Ignacio, where do your ideas come from?
I would say that intrinsically creating is the art is the process of organizing. I think that we get what would you call a subconscious
Hmm.
pleasure of making sense out of chaos. So when every time we create, I think we create because there's something that needs to be fixed or something that needs to exist that doesn't exist. There's a bunch of levels to that, and there's a lot of ways, and there's different reasons to do that. But I think ultimately it comes down to that. Um, so I have my ideas come from problems that I see need to be fixed. For example, the Great Planet Earth debate, the scientific show. Um, that idea came. I got invited to play at a school show, and I got into education. I got into the whole educational system, and I realized that one of the problems that the curriculum has is that it doesn't have an introduction to the courses. When you take the curriculum for example, 8th grade science, you take the first lesson, it's blam, concepts of whatever There is no introduction that helps the students understand why this is important to their lives, why this is being taught to them, why this matters, to help to emotionalize them with the information, uh, which is put it into art. So you have to first. It's like a primer. You have, like we do with everything else. We have a process where we first emotionalize people about stuff, and then you get them into it. So I decided that I would try to create the supplemental courses that were artistic and that would help create an introduction to every course in the school curriculum. And the first one that I did was science, which was energy, and that's the one that I presented. That's the one you're talking about. So that idea came from a problem I saw that I felt needed to be fixed, and I think that all my ideas come from that. Once you are in tune with the fact that the point of life is to create resolutions where there are tensions, or to problem solve. That's basically the point. And you understand that problem solving is a pleasure. We get a lot of our pleasures from solving tensions That's why massages go find tensions and they release them. Everything that is pleasurable and everything that we care about is normally includes a trip from attention to a resolution.
Yeah.
And once you understand that is the point of everything, then you look for tensions, where, which is you look for problems. Where are the problems? And you try to create solutions, creatively create solutions for those problems. And I think that's where my creativity comes from. The songs for the fall of an empire is kind of the same thing. I got into economics in 2008, in 2007, right before the economic crash of 2008. I got into economics through Ron Paul because I read his book called "End the Fed," and he talked, coming from Puerto Rico, he talked in that book about this power that was oppressing them in Texas. I have moved to Texas. I have realized that there was an independence movement in Texas.
Yeah.
There's a strong
Secession. Yeah.
succession movement, and I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. I come from Puerto Rico, and these people here talk exactly the same way as the
Hmm.
independent movement
Hmm.
speaks in Puerto Rico. They're talking about some oppressor, and these are Americans. They're here.
Hmm.
Who is this oppressor? Is it the same oppressor? Are they talking about the same person? Why are they not together? Why don't they get together against their same oppressor? I started having those kind of questions. So I started studying economics, and I realized that there's an important story in economics, which is a story of interest, which is not well understood in English, but even less so in Spanish. There's very little information about interest and all that stuff, and how the banking system world works in English. Now there's a lot. This was like 12 years ago. Now there's a bunch of stuff. But in Spanish, it's still very limited. So that means that if you're a Spanish speaker, you don't have access to this story, to the story of interest, to the story of bonds, of all that stuff. So I think that's a very serious problem because you cannot understand the world and everything that happens now if you do not have a clear understanding of how debt and interest work. So, trying to solve that problem, I got into songs for the fall of an empire. So that's the way I would say where my creativity comes from. I find problems, informational problems in my case, and I try to create concepts that can help uh, uh, solve those problems.
So, and earlier before we started our interview, we were talking about how in one of those conversations we had many years ago, you told me this is like my mission statement. This is what I am driving at um, when you're talking about all this, um, how storytelling is central to everything, and how you want to apply that to your work. And so you have like a purpose, you have like a mission statement, which I think is part of, not part, but central to you being able to keep creating, like what drives you, what motivates you. So I want to go now into the part where we talk about what are those things that encourage or motivate your creativity, and you can freely talk about when you were a kid starting out, and also more recently with your work. So you can let the audience know what things motivates, nurture when you're pursuing some creative project.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I think that there are a couple of issues, but I think the main ones is fear. You have to be taught not to be afraid, and I got that a lot from my father. He was pretty fearless in everything he did. So I was, and he pushed me to do things that were that just help me not be afraid of anything or few things. So I think that one of the things that encourages creativity is the lack of fear, and that's very important because I feel like a lot of people don't develop creativity because they're afraid of mm, of mistakes or being judged, or all the normal things that are normal that are gonna happen are desirable. O sea, mistakes are desirable. They're gonna happen. You cannot be afraid of them. Judging is normal. Everybody's gonna make judgments. That happens. Misinterpretations of what you do. That's normal. That's gonna. So you cannot be afraid of any of that. You have to be fearless in the pursuit of what you are seeing and how you want to put it. So that's an important one. And education, and that's why I'm into education, because my father made sure that I got a better education than what he got. He was not bilingual, so he made sure that I was bilingual. And the bilingual thing is very important. I think people don't understand. When you know a language, it's not just that you know the language. It's that you opened the door to all that language stories, its
Mm.
information, what that language knows, its culture. So that way you can counterbalance your own or whatever other. So you can cross check cultures and ideas much better when you understand Shakespeare, for example, and Chespirito. And
Mm.
that's a very important part of knowing two languages. So I was never rich or anything like that, but I did get the best education that my parents could get, and which was pretty good. So it was an important part of my upbringing. I was given every opportunity, education wise, that I could have been given, and I think that is very important to be able to explore in education. Um, but I also think that you have to develop a craft. None of that would have worked the way it worked if I had not started at 14 developing my craft, my songwriting craft, and putting all the hours that I put into it. And I think that that happens when you realize what you're about and what you're into, and that's a very different thing for everybody, I suppose. But I was lucky enough that at 14, when I found songwriting, I found myself whole. This is this is important. This is it. This fills me. I could always go back to it. I didn't care if I got rejected. I didn't, because I have songwriting, and in there, I could do anything, and I was learning, and it was my world, and having that world, I think even today still saves me, or it's a place that I can always go to. So I think it's important to develop a craft. You have to have, because a craft is basically your laboratory. It's where you go to try what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and I think that's very important. So developing a craft as early as possible, education, and developing a fearless attitude towards everything in life. I think those three things are very important for creativity.
Okay. And what about things that hinders that creativity, like growing up or now? What things can be detrimental to developing your creativity?
But I suppose the opposite, not educating yourself, being afraid of everything, personal. I don't think insecurities help you. There's an angle there. Some people are successful at using insecurities to create as well, because there are tensions, and some people can manage those tensions. I do not know if that's for everybody or that's the way everybody should handle it. But some people handle it that way, even if it's destructive to their nature or to their being. I think that creativity is like everything. It's an energy, and there's a positive way of handling it and a negative way of handling it. So you have to learn how to handle that energy, and it can be a powerful energy, and it can take over your life, like anything. If you do not know how to measure it and and handle it well, put it in the right place and use it in a healthy way. Um, but yeah, I would say that hinders creativity. I also think that in some ways, depending on how much you hang on to your world structures, that can also hinder to your worldview and the structures that you use. That can also hinder creativity. It depends on what kind of a Christian you are. I think that can hinder your creativity. What kind of an atheist you are, I think that can hinder your creativity. So depending if your worldview is so steadfast that it's very little flexible, it has very little
Mm.
flexibility. I think that also hinders a lot of creativity.
So there is a need of openness and flexibility
Yeah, like
to
everything
the
else, like any other structure, anything you can, rigidity is not desirable.
end.
Flexibility is desirable. Things move, things are alive, and things that are alive require cartilage. They require, things move. So if you're too rigid about your worldview, I think that is not gonna help you be creative.
So, and we also spoke before about, um, I was remembering, preparing for this interview, I was remembering because along the years we have had different conversations, and I was remembering when you told me about all this about storytelling and melody in music and how melody is central, and we speak about this with musicians, and many of them still think that the lyrics is more important than the melody, or that the harmony is more important than the melody, and then you're telling them the central piece is a melody, and then I was saying, hey, you have a lot of debate, a lot of people saying no, this is not like that, and how how do you manage this? And you told me, well, I will keep talking about this until people see my way. And I was one of those people that ended up seeing it your way. But I know many people didn't. And I saw there a confidence, and I was telling you about, like, in creativity, the people that studied it say that the creative people have to be risk takers and resilient because they will be a minority of one. So I saw that I could connect that in what you told me back then. And so, how do you develop that confidence, or where do you think it comes from in your case?
I think it comes from the security that having a again that craft since 14,
Hmm.
and the fact that I have a long trail of work that when I put it together, I can see the process. I can see where I failed, where I corrected, uh, where I was amateurish at some moments, where came out when I was more effective. I think that having a craft, a creative craft that has as an end a creation, when you see those creations in the timeline of your life, I think that creates a confidence, because you're putting in every project, in every creative task, you are putting your worldview to the test. And I also very consciously worked on this theory. I realized in high school, for example, that and in church and all these things, I realized that people were not when we talked about music, they did not understand the values that I was talking about because they were having a different relationship with music. They were only inputters of music, and I was trying to be an outputter.
Hmm.
And when you try to become an outputter, I mean when you have to create it, that's when things start to separate. It's not just talk. You have to put your point of view to the test. And when you start seeing how it starts giving you results and it works and you can start making better songs, and well, that gives you confidence because most of the people that you're going to talk to have never written a song. They talk to you about music and they think they know music, and they might know. I think there's also a confusion. People think that knowing about the history of music or the story of the people that make music is knowing music, and those are very different things. You can know everything you want about the Beatles, for example, when they did that, when it's recorded, when this album came out, but that doesn't mean that you understand their music. That's a different conversation, and you can only understand their music when you try to make music yourself and you understand the powers that they were, the energies that they were managing, and how they managed them so brilliantly, and why what they did has power. But just being an inputter, just listening to it, is not. It's just a very limited scope of it. When you start trying to do it yourself, that gives you a more complete scope of it. So I think that that's the way that you develop confidence. You are constantly putting your worldview to the test when you create. That's an important thing about creating. It is in creating when you have to come up with something. That's where the bullshit ends. When you're constantly forced to come up with something out that comes out of your worldview, that's when you don't have. It's not about your opinion or what you think. It's about what you did, what you created, and that has actions have more power than words, obviously. So I think it comes from that. You know, most people will have a conversation about this, but they don't have a long line of work to back it up. So you get confidence from that, and that is not a that is just means that you have put in the hours, that you have put in the time, and that you can be judged on your opinion. If you do not have that for me to judge you on, then it's a weird debate because
Hmm.
all I'm saying, you can go, I put it to the test and you can go and check it out on YouTube or wherever, and that kind of stuff I think it gives you confidence. It makes you put it to the test. You know, you put in the hours, you put in the time, and that's an important part of confidence. You know, time.
So to finish and before I will let you after this question tell our audience about where they can find you on social media, Spotify, um, on YouTube, so they can appreciate some of your work. But I want to ask you, since we are talking in the context of education, is there something that you think that teachers can do in school or parents at home to help kids develop their creativity? Because something that we find in education is that, for example, I am primarily a math teacher. Lately, I've been doing something different, but I started out as a math teacher, and I see people that tell me, "Well, math is just you have a question and it only has one answer, and that's it." So they learn the algorithm, they do it, and that's it. And people think that math is like that. And I tell them it shouldn't be like that. Math is a language that it can be used to solve creatively so many things. Right now, math can be used with this pandemic. It can be used for technology. It can be used in everything. And sometimes in the classroom, teachers don't know, because of ignorance, or maybe because they haven't been brought up in a creative environment, how to help students develop their creativity, and we're just conveying facts and information, and this is the way you do it, and this is the answer, and this is, or looking in the book. And so, how can we have more creative classrooms and experiences for kids?
Yeah, well, I mean, the best I can tell them a couple of things. First of all, I would suggest, I would propose that you consider this: math, science, and art are three different points of views on the same thing, which is time space. Imagine time space is a circle in the middle, and this is math, this is science, and this is art. They all look and they all explain the same thing. The difference is that art is the more sugarized version of that information. Therefore, it's much more palatable, much more people get into it. But everything musical is mathematical, everything artistic is completely mathematical, everything is on the time space grid. So everything in art is mathematical. And when you're doing music, you're doing math with sounds. You just don't realize that it's music because it's like when you eat, you don't realize you're eating iron. You're just eating something, but it's in there. So, but the best way to understand it is that you have to understand that it's all integrated. And the best scientists, that's why the best scientists were always musicians. All of them had a creative part to them. Galileo, Da Vinci, because they're trying to explain the same thing. When you're doing art, you're exploring time and space, and you are exploring the laws of motion, the same laws of inertia, of tension, and when there's a tension, there's a resolution. Those same things, you're doing the same thing every time you're teaching. So understand that in the back of what you're doing, you're managing the same forces, and those forces are best explained in the rules of narrative. So, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I lost
Sorry.
your camera. So it's
Yeah,
important.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I'm back here. I have to check because my cell is dying. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I think it's
But
important.
I still have some time.
Okay. So I would suggest as an educator, you see the connectivity of it all and not the separation of it all. This is the what I call the Da Vinci view of education, which is the science of art and the art of science. They're
Hmm.
all concerned with time space and with motion. Art, particularly with motion, with ethereal motion, meaning the motions in here.
Hmm.
So it's all working on the same principles. And to every teacher, I would tell them you're essentially a storyteller. And the farther you can take your information to your students, the better it is. The book, if you compare it to music, the book is the score. That doesn't work for everybody. Nobody wants to read the score, or very few people want to read the score. You have to take that score and you have to put it into motion. You have to bring in the musicians and you have to perform it. And that version of that same information in the score is much more palatable to the student. If you take that score and you add images, that makes it more palatable. The same score, the same information on the paper of the score, if you add moving images to that same score, it makes it more palatable. Modernity requires that as a teacher, you go as far as you can in whatever information you're teaching your kids. That might be an unfair requirement, but it is what is required because that's what they're used to. That's the informational flow and speed that they're used to when they're being entertained and at home. Asking them to just lower it dramatically and care about what you're going to teach them in school is too harsh. You have to help them make that transition. It's very hard and it's probably an unfair requirement for teachers. But I think it's a necessary requirement. That's why I'm personally interested in creating content that teachers can use in the classroom. But that's what I would tell them.
Awesome, awesome. That's a great answer. So to finish, let our people know where to find you, where to connect with you, where they can see your work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all over YouTube. If you search Ignacio Peña, you will see videos of all my projects there. If you go to my website, IgnacioPeña.net, there's a lot of information there too. I'm on Vimeo, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So I'm all over any of those and always accessible. You can always ask me anything. I love talking about narrative, as you know. So this is important for me. So and teachers are important for me, and education is important for me. I have decided that one of the best things I can do with my life is try to help teachers in every way possible because I think they are in a very unfair battle and against a very hard the enemy to get the attention of the kids, and I think that's one of the greatest challenges any human has. A teacher get the attention of a kid, of a student. It's hard
Well,
for an
thank you.
artist in this world to
Hmm.
get the attention of people. Imagine a
Hmm.
teacher getting the attention and the heart of a student. You know, getting his real full attention to teach him things that are like, that can be that can be so boring if you don't spice them up a
Yeah,
little.
it's I know it's not easy to digest sometimes.
You know,
The
it's hard
information.
information. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's like medicine. You know, it's like the gym. It's not easy to. The good things require that you put in time and work. You know, it's not easy. So it's very hard. The proposition that for teachers is it's a very hard. I wish people understood how hard and conceptually that proposition of a teacher is. You know, you take this information that is hard to understand and make it
yeah,
pleasurable and make the kids like it, and you know that's hard. You know.
yeah. It is. It is definitely, definitely. And I know that the teachers that will listen to this will appreciate what you're saying and those that advice and
Yeah,
I know always been talking about creativity and storytelling. I think this is really important. It's a really important conversation, and that many people, that I see more people talking about
yes, we're
people in
getting there. We're
different
getting there.
in different areas, and I hope that it gets into education, it get into the sciences, into the
It's
people that
getting
are
there
moving.
slowly. I
Hmm.
would like to suggest there's 5 people of the 20th century that I always like to suggest to people if you want to get into the understanding of storytelling. I would say the best 5 names that have explained it. Carl Jung in psychology, he explains the archetypes, which is the main ingredients of stories. Edward Bernays understood it well enough and was the one that sold it to the corporations, and he's the father of marketing. So it's important to understand that too, because for good or for bad, marketing is our societal structure that has storytelling most developed, and that's important to understand. Joseph Campbell, uh, who is the not the inventor but the man that brought us the monomyth, the hero's journey. He is the
Hmm.
one that explains how all cultures are telling the same story essentially, or the same 2 or 3 stories. We also have Walter Fisher, who brought us the narrative paradigm. And I would say that the last man who has a lot of information on YouTube to explain the story is Jordan Peterson. He has a lot of great videos that explain how stories and archetypes work for humans. So I would suggest those 5 names to study.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So we got an extra information there. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Ignacio, thank you very much for this interview, and I hope that we can at some point have other conversations like this.
Sure, that'd be great. I want to say hello to all the teachers. I hope you guys are all right, safe, and you're at the front line of one of the most important wars, if not the most important war. So, um, to me, you're an important soldier, and in the middle of the most important war, which is a war against ignorance, against darkness, against not understanding. So it's an important thing. So don't stop.
All right. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.